Some women collect shoes. Others collect heartbreak. Sarah Chin collected rejections like vintage postcards, each one a small masterpiece of creative excuses. "You're amazing, but..." became her Christmas carol, sung in three-part harmony by every man who'd ever taken her to dinner. This December, she'd given up on finding someone to bring home to her parents' annual Christmas Eve disaster. Her mother had already started the interrogation calls. Her married sisters had already booked their victory laps around the dining table. And her bank account had already started whimpering about another year of "I'm focusing on my career" gifts. But sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor. Sometimes it wraps your solution in a $10,000 suit and drops him right into your coffee shop at 7 in the morning, looking like he stepped out of a magazine ad for expensive mistakes. Sometimes your rescue comes in the form of a man who owns half the county and doesn't know your name, but who's about to offer you the most dangerous Christmas present you've never asked for. The morning Sarah's life changed forever started exactly like every other morning in her small Montana coffee shop. The ancient espresso machine wheezed like her grandfather's old truck. The December wind rattled the windows hard enough to make her wonder if she'd remembered to pay the heating bill. And Mrs. Henderson sat in her usual corner booth, nursing the same cup of coffee she'd bought an hour ago while pretending to read the newspaper and actually eavesdropping on every conversation within a 3-table radius. Sarah wiped down the counter for the 5th time in 10 minutes, a nervous habit that had worn the wood smooth in certain spots. The morning rush had been more of a morning trickle, which meant she'd spent most of her time staring at her phone, dreading the inevitable call from her mother. The bell above the door chimed, bringing with it a gust of cold air and trouble in an expensive coat. She looked up. Then, looked up some more. The man filling her doorway was the kind of tall that made other tall men feel inadequate. Dark hair, darker eyes, and the sort of jaw that suggested his ancestors had been carved from particularly attractive granite. His coat probably cost more than her rent. His boots definitely cost more than her car payment. He was also staring at her like she'd just sprouted a second head. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked, proud that her voice came out steady despite the fact that her brain had apparently short-circuited. He blinked. Once. Twice. Then, cleared his throat. "Coffee. Black. Large." She busied herself with the order, hyper-aware of his presence in her small space. He made everything feel smaller somehow, like he was taking up more room than physics should allow. When she turned back with his cup, he was studying her face with an intensity that made her self-conscious about the flour smudge she was pretty sure decorated her left cheek. "That'll be $3.50, she said. He handed her a 20. "Keep the change." Before she could protest the absurd tip, he was gone, leaving nothing but the scent of expensive cologne and the feeling that something important had just happened, though she couldn't figure out what. Mrs. Henderson materialized at the counter like smoke. Well. That was Cameron Ridge. Sarah nearly dropped the 20. Ridge? As in Ridge Ranch? As in owns half the Valley Ridge? The very same. And, honey, the way that man was looking at you. Mrs. Henderson fanned herself with the newspaper. Like you were the last piece of pie at a church social. Heat crept up Sarah's neck. He was probably just confused. This isn't exactly the kind of place he'd usually get his coffee. Confused, my foot. That man knew exactly where he was and what he wanted. Mrs. Henderson's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Question is, what are you gonna do about it?" Sarah spent the rest of the morning trying not to think about Cameron Ridge's dark eyes or the way he'd said coffee like it was a secret between them. She failed spectacularly. Her phone buzzed at noon. "Mom, of course." "Sarah, sweetheart, I was just confirming the Christmas Eve menu. Will you be bringing someone this year, or should I set the usual single-place setting?" The question hit like a small, familiar knife between her ribs. "Just me, Mom." "Oh, honey. You know I don't mind, but your father keeps asking if there's something wrong with you." "Not wrong, just, you know. You're 32. As if she could forget. As if the mirror didn't remind her every morning that she was 32 and single in a town where women her age were supposed to be married with at least 2 kids and a minivan. I'm fine, Mom. Really? Work's just been crazy. I know, sweetie. But maybe this year you could try one of those dating apps? Your cousin Rebecca met her husband on one. They're expecting their 3rd baby in February. Sarah closed her eyes and counted to 10. Then, to 20. I'll think about it. Good. And, honey? Wear that red dress to dinner. The one that shows off your figure. You never know who might be there. After her mother hung up, Sarah stared at her phone for a long moment. 3 weeks until Christmas. 3 weeks to either find a boyfriend or endure another evening of pitying looks and well-meaning suggestions from relatives who couldn't understand why a perfectly nice girl like her was still single. The bell chimed again. Cameron Ridge walked in, same expensive coat, same intense stare, same effect on her nervous system. Coffee. Black. Large, he said, as if they were continuing a conversation from this morning. This time, Sarah studied him while she worked. There were lines around his eyes that suggested either laughter or worry, maybe both. His hands, when he reached for the cup, were calloused despite the expensive clothes. Working hands. Ranch hands. You're Sarah Chen, he said, and it wasn't a question. She nearly spilled his coffee. How do you know my name? Small town. You've been running this place for what, 3 years now? 4. She was surprised he'd been paying attention. Ridge Ranch was 15 miles outside town, and men like Cameron Ridge didn't usually frequent places like her coffee shop. He nodded, studying her face again with that unnerving intensity. You're not married. It wasn't a question, but Sarah felt her cheeks burn anyway. No. Boyfriend? This was getting weird. And weirdly personal. Why do you want to know? Cameron set down his coffee cup without drinking from it. He looked at her for a long moment, some internal debate playing out behind his dark eyes. Finally, he seemed to reach a decision. Because I have a proposition for you. Sarah's heart did something acrobatic in her chest. I'm sorry? My grandmother is expecting me to bring someone home for Christmas. Someone serious. Someone I'm thinking about marrying. Okay. Sarah had no idea where this was going, but she was pretty sure she didn't like the destination. The problem is, I don't have anyone. And I don't have time to find anyone. I've got 4,000 head of cattle, a ranch to run, and 3 weeks until Christmas dinner. Sarah stared at him. So you thought you'd just walk into my coffee shop and ask you to pretend to be my girlfriend? The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Sarah opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. No sound came out. Cameron continued as if he hadn't just proposed the most ridiculous thing she'd ever heard. It would just be for Christmas. A few dinners, maybe some family gatherings. Nothing complicated. I'd pay you, of course. Pay me? Sarah's voice cracked on the words. $50,000. Sarah sat down hard on the stool behind the counter. $50,000. Enough to fix the espresso machine and the leaky roof and maybe even take a vacation somewhere warm. Enough to stop worrying about every unexpected expense and every slow month. You're insane, she said. Probably. But I'm also desperate. Why me? I mean, surely there are other women who'd be willing to pretend to date you for that kind of money. Prettier women. Richer women. Women who actually know how to act like they belong in your world. Something shifted in his expression. That's exactly why it has to be you. I don't understand. Cameron leaned against the counter, his presence overwhelming in the small space. My grandmother is 93 years old and sharper than a whip. She'd see through any society woman in 5 minutes. But you. He gestured toward her, taking in her flour-dusted apron and sensible shoes. You're real. Authentic. The kind of woman she'd actually approve of. Sarah felt a laugh bubbling up in her throat, somewhere between hysteria and disbelief. So you want to hire me to be authentically fake? I want to hire you to be yourself. Just as my girlfriend. For 3 weeks. For 3 weeks. Sarah stared at him, this impossibly handsome, impossibly rich man who just walked into her ordinary life and turned it upside down. And then, what? After Christmas, you just disappear? Tell your grandmother we broke up? Something like that. We'll figure out the details. The coffee shop felt too small suddenly, like the walls were closing in. Sarah stood up, paced to the window, then back to the counter. This is crazy. Maybe. But is it crazy enough to work? Before Sarah could answer, her phone rang. Mom again. Don't answer it, Cameron said quietly. How did you lucky guess? Look, I know this is a lot to process. Take some time to think about it. He pulled a business card from his wallet and set it on the counter. Heavy stock, embossed lettering. Cameron Ridge Ranch Holdings. Call me when you decide. He left his full cup of coffee on the counter and walked out, leaving Sarah staring at the business card like it might explode. Mrs. Henderson appeared at her elbow again. What was that about? Sarah picked up the card, turned it over in her hands. I think I was just propositioned. For what kind of proposition? The legal kind. Sarah looked up to find Mrs. Henderson watching her with keen eyes. He wants to hire me to pretend to be his girlfriend for Christmas. Mrs. Henderson whistled low. That boy's got more money than sense, but he's not stupid. Question is, are you going to do it? Sarah looked down at the card again. $50,000. No more lying awake at night wondering if she'd be able to make rent. No more agonizing over every expense, every repair, every unexpected bill. And no more Christmas Eve interrogations from her family about her love life. I don't know, she said. It's ridiculous. Honey, sometimes ridiculous is exactly what you need. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment above the coffee shop, staring at Cameron's business card. She'd spent the afternoon Googling him, which had been both helpful and deeply unhelpful. Helpful because she'd learned he was 35, had inherited Ridge Ranch from his grandfather 5 years ago, and had turned it into one of the most successful operations in the state. Unhelpful because the photos showed him at various social functions with a parade of beautiful women, none of whom looked like they'd ever set foot in a coffee shop that wasn't located on the ground floor of a 5-star hotel. What was she even thinking? She couldn't pretend to be someone she wasn't. She didn't know anything about ranch life or high society or how to make conversation with people who own more than one horse. Her phone rang. Mom, for the 3rd time that day. Hi, Mom. Sarah, honey, I was thinking about what we talked about earlier. Maybe we should set up a profile on one of those dating sites. I could help you pick out photos. Sarah closed her eyes. Mom, I really don't think, or maybe we could ask around at church. Mrs. Wilson's nephew just moved back to town. He's divorced, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Shows he's willing to commit. Mom, and there's always the Christmas Eve party at the Hendersons. Lots of single men attend that. You could wear the red dress and maybe do something with your hair. I'll bring someone to Christmas dinner. The words popped out of Sarah's mouth before she could stop them. Silence stretched across the phone line. You will? Her mother's voice was carefully neutral, like she was talking to someone who might be having a breakdown. Yes. I've been seeing someone. It's new, but it's serious. Sarah, honey, are you making this up to get me to stop asking? Heat flooded Sarah's cheeks. No, Mom. His name is Cameron Ridge. He owns Ridge Ranch. Another silence, this one filled with the sound of her mother's sharp intake of breath. Cameron Ridge? The Cameron Ridge? Honey, how on earth did you meet Cameron Ridge? He comes into the coffee shop. And he asked you out? Sarah winced at the surprise in her mother's voice. Yes, Mom. He asked me out. Well. Well, that's wonderful, sweetheart. I can't wait to meet him. What's he like? Is he as handsome as they say? Oh, your sisters are going to be so jealous. After her mother hung up, Sarah stared at the phone in her hand. What had she just done? She'd basically committed herself to Cameron's insane plan without even agreeing to it. She picked up his business card, turned it over in her hands one more time, and dialed his number before she could lose her nerve. He answered on the second ring. Cameron Ridge. It's Sarah. Sarah Chen. From the coffee shop. I know who you are. His voice was warm, amused. I was hoping you'd call. I just told my mother I'm bringing you to Christmas dinner. Did you now? So I guess that's a yes. To your proposition. But, I have conditions. I'm listening. Sarah took a deep breath. First, nothing physical. This is strictly business. Agreed. Second, you have to coach me. I don't know anything about your world or how to act like I belong in it. Not a problem. Third, when this is over, it's over. No awkward aftermath, no expectations, no complications. There was a pause. Understood. And, fourth. Sarah hesitated, then forged ahead. You have to make it convincing. My family can't know this is fake. Sarah? Yeah? You just made this the best deal I've made all year. After she hung up, Sarah sat in her quiet apartment and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. In 3 weeks, she'd either be $50,000 richer, or she'd have made the biggest mistake of her life. Possibly both. Cameron Ridge's truck was worth more than Sarah's entire apartment, including furniture. She discovered this unfortunate fact when he picked her up the next morning for what he called girlfriend boot camp. The leather seats probably cost more than her monthly rent. The dashboard looked like something from a spaceship designed by someone with excellent taste and unlimited resources. Relax, Cameron said as she climbed into the passenger seat, trying not to leave coffee shop residue on anything. It's just dinner at my grandmother's house. Just dinner. Sarah buckled her seatbelt with hands that definitely weren't shaking. With your 93-year-old grandmother who's apparently sharper than a whip and will see through any fake girlfriend in 5 minutes. That's why you're perfect for this job. You're not fake. Sarah stared out the window as they drove through downtown, past the bank where she'd been turned down for a loan 3 times, past the dress shop where she'd never bought anything that wasn't on clearance, past the fancy restaurant where she'd never eaten because $30 entrees belonged to a different universe. Tell me about your family, Cameron said, navigating through traffic like a man who'd never worried about anything more serious than which expensive truck to drive. What do you need to know? Everything. If we're dating, I'd know about your family. Sarah shifted in the leather seat. My parents live about 20 minutes outside town. Dad's a retired teacher, Mom works part-time at the library. I have 2 sisters, both married, both have kids, both live within 10 minutes of my parents' house. And they give you grief about being single. It wasn't a question. Sarah glanced at him sideways. How did you know that? Lucky guess. What else? That's pretty much it. We're not interesting people, Cameron. We don't own ranches or have trust funds or attend charity galas. We eat dinner at 6, watch the news at 11, and consider Olive Garden a special occasion. Cameron was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the steering wheel. My grandmother is going to love you. How can you possibly know that? Because everything you just described is exactly how I grew up. Before the ranch took off, before the money, we were farmers scraping by on luck and stubbornness. Grandma Rose remembers what that was like. They turned onto a winding road that led away from town, through rolling hills dotted with cattle and horses. The landscape was beautiful in a stark, honest way that made Sarah's chest feel tight for reasons she couldn't name. What about your family? She asked. What do I need to know about them? Cameron's jaw tightened slightly. Not much family left. Just Grandma Rose and my Aunt Eleanor. My parents died in a car accident when I was 15. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate, but they were all she had. Grandma Rose raised me after that. She's the one who built this ranch into what it is today. Everything I am, everything I have, I owe to her. There was something in his voice, a weight that made Sarah study his profile. She's sick. It wasn't a question. Cameron's hands tightened on the steering wheel. How did you know? The way you said her name. The urgency behind this whole crazy plan. Sarah felt pieces clicking together in her mind. She's dying. Cameron pulled over to the side of the road and put the truck in park. For a long moment, he stared out at the rolling hills, his face carved from stone. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctors say 6 months, maybe less. Sarah's heart clenched. Cameron, I'm so sorry. She's been asking about my love life for 2 years now. Worried I'm going to end up alone, that the ranch will become more important than finding someone to share it with. His laugh was bitter. The irony is, she's right. The ranch is all I've cared about for so long that I wouldn't know how to have a real relationship if someone handed me an instruction manual. So you decided to hire one instead. I decided to give her what she wants for Christmas. One last Christmas where she doesn't have to worry about me being alone. Sarah stared at him, this man who'd walked into her coffee shop and turned her world upside down. Yesterday, she'd thought he was arrogant and entitled. Today, she was seeing something else entirely. Grief. Desperation. Love for the woman who'd raised him. You could have told me, she said quietly. About your grandmother being sick. I would have understood. Would you? Or would you have felt sorry for me and agreed for the wrong reasons? Sarah considered this. Probably both. Cameron looked at her then, really looked at her. And, now? Now I think you're not nearly as much of an entitled rich boy as I thought yesterday. Thanks, I think. They drove the rest of the way to Ridge Ranch in comfortable silence. Sarah tried not to gawk as they passed through gates that probably cost more than her car, down a winding drive lined with trees that looked like they'd been planted by someone with a vision and the budget to execute it. The house, when it came into view, took her breath away. It wasn't the mansion she'd expected. Instead, it was a sprawling, single-story structure that seemed to grow out of the landscape itself. Stone and wood and large windows that reflected the sky. Beautiful without being ostentatious. Wealthy without being vulgar. Your grandmother has good taste, Sarah said. She designed it herself. Took her 3 years to get every detail right. They parked in front of a 3-car garage that was bigger than Sarah's entire apartment. Cameron came around to open her door, a gesture that would have seemed automatic if she hadn't caught the nervous energy radiating from him. Any last-minute advice? Sarah asked as they walked toward the front door. Be yourself. Ask questions about the ranch. She loves talking about the cattle operation. And, whatever you do, don't let her show you my baby pictures. You have baby pictures? Unfortunately, yes. And she has absolutely no shame about sharing them. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a woman who couldn't possibly be 93. Rose Ridge was tiny, maybe 5 feet tall in her sensible shoes, but she commanded space like someone twice her size. Her white hair was perfectly styled, her blue eyes were sharp as cut glass, and her smile was warm enough to melt snow. So you're the girl who's finally caught my grandson's attention, she said, looking Sarah up and down with frank curiosity. I can see why. You're prettier than your pictures. Sarah shot Cameron a look. Pictures? I may have Googled you, he admitted. Professional research. Come in, Rose said, waving them inside. I hope you're hungry. I made enough food to feed half the county. The interior of the house was even more beautiful than the exterior. Warm wood, comfortable furniture, and photographs everywhere. Generations of rich family history lined the walls, from faded sepia prints to recent digital photos. Sarah found herself studying them as Rose led them toward the kitchen, trying to spot Cameron in the crowd of faces. "That's him at 16, Rose said, catching Sarah's gaze on a particular photo. "Right after he grew a foot in 6 months and spent a year walking into things." The photo showed a gangly teenager with two long limbs and an uncertain smile, barely recognizable as the confident man beside her.
"Grandma," Cameron warned.
"What?" "She should know what she's getting herself into. You were a disaster at 16.
Couldn't walk across a room without knocking something over."
The kitchen was enormous, with a center island that could have hosted a small conference and appliances that belonged in a restaurant. Rose moved around it with the efficiency of someone who'd been cooking for large groups for decades, pulling dishes from the oven and stirring pots with practiced ease.
"Can I help with anything?" Sarah asked.
Rose looked at her with approval.
A woman who offers to help in the kitchen.
"I like her already, Cameron." They spent the next hour preparing dinner together, and Sarah found herself relaxing despite her nerves. Rose was funny and sharp and completely unpretentious. She asked questions about the coffee shop, about Sarah's family, about her plans for the future, but never in a way that felt like an interrogation.
Instead, it felt like genuine interest. "So how did you two meet?" Rose asked as they set the table in the dining room.
Sarah and Cameron exchanged a look.
They'd rehearsed this story in the truck, but suddenly, Sarah's mind went completely blank. "Coffee shop," Cameron said smoothly.
"I stopped in one morning, and there she was."
"Love at first sight?" Rose's eyes twinkled.
"More like confusion at first sight," Sarah said, the truth slipping out before she could stop it.
"I thought he was lost."
Cameron laughed, a sound that was entirely too attractive.
"I was lost. Just not geographically." Rose beamed at them. "How romantic. And when did you know it was serious?"
Another rehearsed answer, but again Sarah found herself going off script.
"When he came back the next day. And the day after that."
"Men like him don't usually frequent places like my coffee shop."
"Men like him? Rich.
Successful.
Completely out of my league." Rose snorted. "Honey, you've got it backwards. He's the lucky one." During dinner, Sarah learned that Rose had been running cattle ranches since before Sarah was born.
She'd married Cameron's grandfather when she was 18, raised 4 children while working the ranch, and took over operations completely when her husband died 15 years ago. "Cameron thinks he's in charge now," Rose said, winking at Sarah. "But I still make all the important decisions."
"Like what?" Sarah asked, charmed despite herself.
"Like which bulls to buy, which pastures to rotate, and which girlfriends are worth keeping around."
Cameron nearly choked on his wine. "Grandma." "What?" "It's true. I ran off that Stephanie woman, didn't I? And that awful Courtney who kept trying to redecorate my kitchen." Sarah glanced at Cameron. "Stephanie and Courtney?"
"Ancient history," he said quickly.
"Gold diggers," Rose said dismissively. "Both of them. Could spot them from a mile away."
She looked at Sarah appraisingly. "You, on the other hand, have calluses on your hands and flour under your fingernails. A woman who works for what she has."
Heat flooded Sarah's cheeks.
She'd thought she'd cleaned all the flour off.
After dinner, Rose insisted on showing Sarah around the ranch.
They walked through barns that were cleaner than most people's houses, past corrals full of horses that looked like they belonged in magazines, through pastures where cattle grazed under the setting sun.
"It's beautiful," Sarah said, meaning it.
"I can see why Cameron loves it so much." "His grandfather used to say the land gets in your blood," Rose said. "Once it's there, nothing else will ever satisfy you quite the same way." They paused by a fence overlooking a valley that stretched to the horizon. The sunset painted everything gold and orange, and Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a longing for something she couldn't name.
"Can I ask you something?"
Rose said, leaning against the fence post.
Sarah nodded, though she had a feeling she wouldn't like the question. How long have you two really been dating? Sarah's heart stopped. I'm sorry?
Rose smiled, but it wasn't unkind.
Honey, I've been watching people for 93 years. I know pretend when I see it. Panic flooded Sarah's system.
She opened her mouth to deny it, to maintain the lie, but something in Rose's expression stopped her.
How did you know? Cameron's been coming to dinner every Sunday for 5 years.
In all that time, he's never once mentioned a girlfriend. Then, suddenly, 3 weeks before Christmas, he calls and says he's bringing someone special.
Rose shook her head.
Plus, you two barely touch each other. Real couples can't keep their hands to themselves, especially in the early stages. Sarah felt the elaborate plan crumbling around her.
Are you going to tell him you know? That depends. Why are you doing this? Sarah looked out over the valley, trying to figure out how to explain. He offered me money. A lot of money. More than I've ever seen in my life. And that's the only reason?
Sarah thought about Cameron's face when he talked about his grandmother, about the weight in his voice when he'd said everything he owed to her.
No, she said quietly. He loves you.
He wants you to have one last Christmas where you don't have to worry about him being alone. Rose was quiet for a long moment.
He told you I was sick. Not at first. But, yes.
And, knowing it's all pretend, knowing you're being paid to be here, you still came anyway.
Yes. Rose studied her face in the fading light. Why? Sarah searched for an answer that made sense. Because sometimes people need help carrying things that are too heavy to carry alone.
And, because even though this is fake, even though I barely know him, I can see that losing you is going to break his heart.
If I can make this Christmas a little easier for both of you, then maybe that's worth something.
Rose reached over and squeezed Sarah's hand. Her fingers were small and strong and warm. I'm going to die soon, she said matter-of-factly.
Probably before spring.
And, when I do, that boy is going to bury himself so deep in this ranch that he'll forget there's a world beyond these fences. He'll work 18-hour days and eat dinner alone and convince himself that's enough.
Sarah's throat felt tight. I know. So here's what we're going to do.
We're going to make this Christmas so real, so perfect, that maybe he'll remember what it feels like to have someone to share his life with. And, maybe, if we're very lucky, he'll figure out that the woman he hired to pretend to love him might actually be worth keeping around for real. Sarah stared at her. Rose, I don't think you're going to fall in love with him, Rose said with complete certainty.
It's already started, hasn't it? That's not what this is about. Isn't it? Rose smiled. Honey, I've been watching you two all evening. The way you look at him when he's not paying attention. The way he watches you when you're talking to me. The way you both light up when the other one laughs. She shook her head.
You can call it whatever you want, but I know love when I see it, even when the people feeling it don't know it yet. They walked back to the house in comfortable silence, Sarah's mind reeling from the conversation. Rose was wrong, of course.
She couldn't be falling for Cameron.
This was a business arrangement, nothing more. The fact that he was handsome and kind and devoted to his family was irrelevant. The fact that he made her laugh and feel more interesting than she'd ever felt in her life was just a pleasant side effect. The fact that her heart had done something acrobatic when he'd smiled at her over dinner meant absolutely nothing. Cameron was waiting in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher with the efficiency of someone who'd been doing his own dishes for years.
How was the tour? He asked.
Educational, Rose said, shooting Sarah a look full of mischief.
I think Sarah's starting to understand what she's getting herself into. Cameron glanced between them, clearly sensing undercurrents he couldn't identify. Should I be worried? Always, Rose said cheerfully.
Now, Sarah, I hope you'll come to church with us on Sunday. The whole congregation is dying to meet Cameron's mysterious girlfriend.
Sarah's stomach dropped. Church?
Our Lady of Perpetual Guilt, Cameron said.
Don't worry, it's not as bad as it sounds. It's exactly as bad as it sounds, Rose corrected.
But, it's also where half the county goes to catch up on gossip.
If you want people to believe you're really dating, you need to be seen together in public.
On the drive back to town, Cameron was unusually quiet. Sarah spent most of the trip staring out the window, trying to process everything that had happened. Rose knew the truth but was willing to play along. More than that, she seemed to think something real might develop between them. Which was ridiculous. Sarah was being paid to pretend to be his girlfriend.
Cameron was a wealthy rancher who could have any woman he wanted.
She was a small-town coffee shop owner who hadn't had a successful relationship since college. They were from different worlds, and, when this was over, they'd return to those worlds and probably never see each other again except when he occasionally stopped in for coffee.
"What did you and Grandma Rose talk about during your walk?" Cameron asked as they reached the outskirts of town. Sarah's heart jumped. "Ranch stuff.
The history of the place. Your baby pictures. I told you not to let her show you those."
"She didn't show them to me. She just described them in vivid detail." Cameron groaned. "What else?"
Sarah hesitated. Rose had asked her to keep their conversation private, at least for now.
"She likes me. I could tell. She's not usually that warm with strangers. Maybe I'm just naturally likable." "Maybe you are."
Something in his tone made her look at him. In the dashboard light, his profile was sharp and serious, his hands steady on the steering wheel.
"Cameron?"
"Yeah?"
"This is going to work, isn't it?"
"She's going to believe we're really together." He was quiet for a moment.
"Yeah. I think she's going to believe it."
He pulled up in front of her coffee shop and put the truck in park, but neither of them made any move to get out. The silence stretched between them, comfortable and charged at the same time.
"Thank you," Cameron said finally. "For tonight. For doing this at all. I know it's not easy, pretending to be something you're not."
Sarah looked at him, this man who was paying her to be his girlfriend, who'd trusted her with his grandmother's illness, who'd grown up scraping by on luck and stubbornness just like she had.
"It's not as hard as I thought it would be," she said quietly.
Something shifted in his expression.
"What do you mean?"
Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs.
"Nothing. I just meant, you're easy to be around. That's all."
Cameron studied her face in the dim light. For a moment, Sarah thought he might say something important, something that would change everything between them. Instead, he cleared his throat and looked away. "I'll pick you up Sunday morning for church.
9:30. I'll be ready."
Sarah climbed out of the truck and walked to her door, hyper-aware of Cameron waiting until she was safely inside before driving away. She climbed the stairs to her apartment and sat on her couch in the dark, trying to figure out what was happening to her.
Rose was wrong. She couldn't be falling for Cameron Ridge.
That would be the most foolish thing she'd ever done, and Sarah Chen was not a foolish woman. Even if her heart was currently arguing otherwise. The Sunday morning church service at Our Lady of Perpetual Guilt was exactly as advertised. Sarah spent the entire hour feeling like she was on display in a museum exhibit titled Cameron Ridge's Mysterious Girlfriend. Whispers followed them from the parking lot to their pew, and she caught more than one person pulling out their phone to discreetly photograph them together. "Smile," Cameron murmured as they stood for the opening hymn.
"You look like you're facing a firing squad." "I feel like I'm facing a firing squad," Sarah whispered back. "Half the congregation is staring at us. The other half is pretending not to stare while actually staring. That's not helpful." Cameron's hand found hers, his fingers threading through hers with casual ease. The contact sent electricity up her arm, and Sarah had to remind herself that this was all part of the performance. Fake boyfriends held their fake girlfriends' hands in public. It meant nothing. Even if her heart was currently disagreeing with that assessment. After the service, they were ambushed by what felt like half the town. Mrs. Peterson from the bank wanted to know how long they'd been dating. Mr. Hamilton from the hardware store asked Cameron if he was planning to expand the ranch now that he was settling down. Mrs. Chun from the grocery store, no relation despite the shared last name,
demanded to know when they were planning to get married. "We're taking things one day at a time," Sarah managed, her cheeks burning. "Smart girl," Mrs. Chen approved. "Don't let him rush you. Men always want to rush things." Rose appeared at Sarah's elbow like a guardian angel. "Are you ready for lunch, dear?" "I'm making my famous pot roast." They escaped to Cameron's truck, where Sarah promptly slumped against the passenger seat. "I think I need a drink," she said. "It's 11:30 in the morning." "Your point?" Cameron laughed, the sound doing dangerous things to her nervous system. "You did great. Very convincing. I barely said 3 words. Sometimes that's all you need. The way you let me hold your hand, the way you looked at me during the service, anyone watching would have believed we were together." Sarah glanced at him sideways. "How was I looking at you? Like you actually liked me?" There was something in his tone that made her study his profile. "Would that be so surprising?" "A little, yeah. 3 days ago, you thought I was an entitled rich boy who didn't know your name. 3 days ago, I didn't know you were raising cattle and running a ranch and taking care of your sick grandmother while pretending everything was fine." Cameron's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I'm not pretending everything's fine. Aren't you? When was the last time you told someone you were scared? That losing her is going to break you? That you have no idea how to run a ranch and a life without her there to guide you?" The truck swerved slightly as Cameron pulled over to the side of the road. He put it in park and stared out at the rolling hills, his jaw working like he was trying to swallow words that wanted to come out. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said finally. "Don't I? Cameron, I've been watching you for 3 days. You're holding yourself together with duct tape and stubbornness, and you're terrified that if you let yourself feel how scared you really are, you'll fall apart completely." "And if I do? Fall apart? What happens to the ranch? What happens to the 50 people who work for me? What happens to Grandma Rose if she sees me break down?" His voice cracked on the last words, and Sarah felt something inside her chest tear open. Without thinking, she reached across the truck and covered his hand with hers. "You don't have to carry everything alone," she said quietly. "That's what people who love you are for." Cameron looked at their joined hands, then up at her face. "Is that what this is? Love?" The question hung between them like a bridge that could either support their weight or collapse entirely. Sarah felt her heart hammering against her ribs, felt the careful walls she'd built around this arrangement starting to crumble. "I don't know," she whispered. "I think so. Maybe. God, this is so stupid." "Why is it stupid?" "Because you're paying me to pretend to love you. Because when Christmas is over, you're going to go back to your ranch and your life, and I'm going to go back to my coffee shop, and this will all have been just a very expensive form of community theater." Cameron was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of her hand. "What if it doesn't have to be?" "What do you mean? What if this doesn't end at Christmas? What if we try making it real?" Sarah stared at him, her heart doing acrobatic routines in her chest. "Cameron, I know it's crazy. I know we barely know each other. But, Sarah, these past few days, being with you, seeing my grandmother light up when she talks to you. I can't remember the last time I felt this happy." "You're grieving. You're not thinking clearly." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm thinking clearly for the first time in years." He turned in his seat to face her fully. "What if I fired you?" "What? What if I fired you from being my fake girlfriend, and instead asked you to be my real girlfriend? No money, no contract, just us seeing where this goes." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "You don't understand. I'm not good at this. Relationships. Love. I screw everything up eventually. So do I. We can screw it up together." Before Sarah could respond, Cameron's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and paled. "It's the ranch. I have to," he answered the phone. "Hello? What? When? Okay, we'll be right there." He hung up and started the truck immediately, pulling back onto the road with enough speed to make Sarah grab the door handle.
What's wrong?
One of our prize bulls got out somehow.
Broke through 3 fences and is currently terrorizing Mrs. Henderson's garden party.
Despite the seriousness in his voice, Sarah felt laughter bubbling up in her throat.
Mrs. Henderson is having a garden party? Apparently.
And, thunder, all 2,000 pounds of him, decided to crash it. They drove through town at speeds that were definitely above the limit, past the church where people were still milling around outside, past Sarah's coffee shop, toward the residential area where Mrs. Henderson lived in a house surrounded by the most elaborate garden in 3 counties.
They could hear the screaming from 2 blocks away.
Cameron parked behind a line of cars and they ran toward Mrs. Henderson's backyard, where approximately 30 well-dressed church ladies were pressed against the back fence while a massive black bull stood in the middle of what had once been a pristine garden, contentedly eating prize-winning roses.
"Oh, good grief," Cameron muttered. "Thunder, what have you done?"
Mrs. Henderson spotted them and marched over, her Sunday best covered in dirt and her hat sitting sideways on her head.
"Cameron Ridge, you get that beast out of my garden this instant."
"Yes, ma'am."
"Sarah, stay here." "Like hell I'm staying here."
Cameron shot her a look. "Sarah, he weighs 2,000 pounds. So do some of my customers after their 3rd latte and a cinnamon roll."
"I can handle it." Before Cameron could protest, Sarah walked calmly into the garden. Thunder looked up from his floral breakfast, rose petals hanging from his mouth like some sort of bovine romantic.
"Hey there, big guy," Sarah said softly, approaching slowly with her hands visible.
"Having a nice snack?"
Thunder regarded her with mild interest, then went back to the roses.
"You know, those roses are probably making you thirsty. Bet you'd like some nice cool water."
She glanced around the garden and spotted Mrs. Henderson's decorative fountain, currently running with what looked like clean, fresh water.
"How about we go for a walk? Get you some water and maybe some real food instead of fancy flowers?"
Thunder lifted his head, considering her offer. Sarah took a step toward the gate that led to Mrs. Henderson's front yard, then another. Thunder followed, apparently deciding she had good ideas about snack locations. 20 minutes later, Thunder was safely back in his pasture. Mrs. Henderson's garden looked like it had been hit by a very selective tornado, and Cameron was staring at Sarah like she'd just performed a magic trick.
"How did you do that?" "My uncle had cattle when I was a kid. I spent summers on his farm." Sarah shrugged.
"Thunder's just a big, hungry cow who got lost."
Mrs. Henderson appeared at Cameron's elbow, having restored her hat to its proper position. "That young woman of yours has more sense than the rest of us combined. Including you."
"Yes, ma'am. And she's got away with animals."
"That's important in a rancher's wife." Cameron flushed red.
"Mrs. Henderson, don't you Mrs. Henderson me, young man? I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper, and I've never seen you look at a woman the way you look at her." Sarah felt heat flood her cheeks.
"We're not, of course you're not. Not yet. But you will be."
Mrs. Henderson fixed them both with a knowing look.
"Mark my words."
They drove back to Ridge Ranch in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Sarah kept replaying the conversation in the truck, Cameron's words about making it real echoing in her head.
Could she do it? Could she let herself fall completely for a man who was so far out of her league that they weren't even playing the same sport?
"Penny for your thoughts," Cameron said as they pulled into his driveway. "Just thinking about Thunder and the roses."
"That's all?"
Sarah looked at him, this man who'd walked into her coffee shop and turned her world upside down, who'd offered her $50,000 to pretend to love him, who'd just asked her to try loving him for real.
"That's all," she lied.
Rose greeted them at the door with twinkling eyes and the news that half the county was already calling to check on Thunder's garden party adventure. Mrs. Peterson said Sarah walked right up to that bull like she was greeting an old friend, Rose reported.
"Very impressive."
"It was nothing," Sarah said.
"Nonsense. Most people would have run screaming."
"You have rancher's instincts." They spent the afternoon on Rose's front porch, drinking sweet tea and watching the sunset paint the hills gold and orange. Rose told stories about the early days of the ranch, about Cameron's grandfather and the struggles of building something from nothing. Cameron added details here and there, but mostly he just watched Sarah, his expression unreadable. "I should probably head home," Sarah said as the sky darkened. "Tomorrow's Monday. Coffee shop waits for no one." "Cameron can drive you," Rose said. "But, first, walk with me to the barn. I want to show you something." Sarah glanced at Cameron, who shrugged. They followed Rose across the yard to a large barn that smelled of hay and leather and something indefinably peaceful. This was Cameron's grandfather's workshop, Rose said, leading them inside. "He built most of the furniture in the house right here." The workshop was exactly what Sarah would have expected from a man who'd built a ranch with his own hands. Tools hung in neat rows on pegboards. Half-finished projects sat on sturdy workbenches. Plans and sketches covered one wall, showing everything from fence designs to furniture blueprints. "He was working on this when he died," Rose said, leading them to a corner where a partially built rocking chair sat covered in dust. Sarah ran her fingers along the smooth wood, imagining the hands that had shaped it. "It's beautiful. It was going to be for the front porch. He said every ranch house needed a good rocking chair for watching sunsets." Rose's voice was soft with memory. "I always meant to finish it, but I never had the skill." Cameron stepped closer to examine the chair. "I could finish it." "Could you?" Rose's eyes lit up. "I think so. Grandpa taught me the basics before he died. It might take me a while, but I think he'd like that," Rose said quietly. "I think he'd like knowing his workshop was being used again." They drove back to town in comfortable silence, the evening air cool through the open windows. Sarah found herself memorizing details, the way Cameron's hands looked on the steering wheel, the line of his profile against the dashboard lights, the easy silence between them that felt more intimate than conversation. "Sarah?" Cameron said as they pulled up in front of her coffee shop. "Yeah? What I said earlier, about making this real. I meant it." Sarah's heart stopped. "Cameron, you don't have to answer now. Just think about it. Think about what it would be like if this wasn't pretend." She climbed out of the truck on shaky legs and walked to her door, hyper-aware of him waiting until she was safely inside before driving away. She climbed the stairs to her apartment and sat on her couch in the dark, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. 2 weeks ago, her biggest worry had been whether she'd be able to afford to fix the espresso machine. Now she was falling in love with a man who owned half the county, pretending to be his girlfriend for his dying grandmother, and considering throwing away $50,000 to see if what was growing between them could survive in the real world. Her phone buzzed. A text from Cameron. "Thank you for today. For thunder, for church, for everything. Sweet dreams." Sarah stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "Thank you for asking me to think about it. Sweet dreams to you too." She set the phone aside and went to bed, but sleep was a long time coming. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Cameron's face when he'd asked about making it real, heard Rose's voice saying she knew love when she saw it, felt the echo of Mrs. Henderson's certainty that they'd figure it out eventually. Maybe they would. Maybe this crazy, impossible thing between them could work. Or maybe she was setting herself up for the biggest heartbreak of her life. The next morning brought reality in the form of her usual Monday rush at the coffee shop. Sarah threw herself into work, trying not to think about Cameron or fake relationships or the way her heart had stopped when he'd asked about making it real. It worked until he walked in at 10:30, same expensive coat, same intense stare, same effect on her nervous system. "Coffee. Black. Large," he said, and his smile was different. "Warmer. More personal." "Coming right up," Sarah said, proud that her voice stayed steady. When she handed him the cup, their fingers brushed, and this time Sarah didn't pull away immediately. "Have you thought about it?" he asked quietly. Sarah looked at him, this man who'd changed everything about her life in the space of a week, and made her decision. "Yes," she said. "And the answer is yes. But not for the money. Cameron set down his coffee cup and walked around the counter, not stopping until he was close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes.
What for, then? For the way you look at your grandmother. For the way you held my hand in church. For the fact that you think I'm brave enough to try this even though we both know I'm terrified. Sarah, and for the way you make me feel like I'm worth more than I've ever thought I was.
Cameron cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones.
You are. You're worth everything.
When he kissed her, it was nothing like the careful, performative touches they'd shared for Rose's benefit.
This was real and desperate and full of promise.
Sarah melted into him, her hands fisting in his expensive coat, and thought dimly that this was what falling felt like. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Cameron rested his forehead against hers.
So we're doing this? For real? We're doing this for real. Even though I'm a workaholic rancher with commitment issues and a dying grandmother?
Even though I'm a small-town coffee shop owner with trust issues and absolutely no idea how to be a rancher's girlfriend. Cameron laughed, the sound warm and rich and full of joy.
I love you, Sarah Chen. I love you too, Cameron Ridge. God help us both.
3 weeks later, on Christmas Eve, Sarah stood in her parents' dining room wearing the red dress her mother had been pushing for months, watching Cameron charm her entire extended family with stories about ranch life and easy laughter. Her sisters had given up being jealous somewhere around the second course, and her father had spent most of dinner asking detailed questions about cattle breeding that Cameron answered with genuine enthusiasm. "So when's the wedding?" her mother asked as they cleared dessert plates.
"Mom," Sarah warned. "What?" "It's a reasonable question. You can't expect me not to ask."
Cameron caught Sarah's eye across the table and winked. They'd talked about this, about the questions that would come, about how to handle the pressure from family who saw a successful relationship and immediately started planning the next steps. "We're taking it one day at a time, Mrs. Chen," Cameron said diplomatically.
"Smart man," Sarah's father approved. "No point rushing into anything."
After dinner, they drove to Ridge Ranch for Rose's Christmas Eve gathering. The house was full of neighbors and ranch hands and friends, all gathered around Rose's massive dining table for what she declared would be her last Christmas Eve party. "Not because I'm dying," she'd announced to the assembled crowd.
"Because I'm 93 and I'm tired of cooking for all you people."
Sarah found herself in the kitchen with Rose, helping serve dessert while Cameron entertained the crowd with stories about Thunder's garden party adventure.
"So," Rose said quietly, arranging cookies on a platter. "How are things?" "Really? Good. Really good." Sarah felt heat creep up her neck. It's not pretend anymore." "I know, honey. I could tell the moment you two walked in. You're both glowing." "Is it that obvious?" Rose laughed. "Only to someone who's been watching love stories for 93 years. You two have figured it out."
They carried dessert to the dining room, where Cameron was deep in conversation with Mr. Peterson about expanding the ranch's organic certification. Sarah caught his eye as she set down the cookie platter, and he smiled at her with such warmth that she felt her knees go weak. Later, after the last guest had gone home and they'd finished cleaning up, the three of them sat on Rose's front porch in the rocking chair Cameron had finished just in time for Christmas. Sarah curled up in Cameron's lap while Rose rocked gently beside them, all of them watching the stars emerge in the clear winter sky. "This is perfect," Rose said quietly. "Exactly what I wanted for Christmas." "What's that?" Sarah asked. "To see my grandson happy. To know he's found someone who loves him for who he is, not what he has. To know that when I'm gone, he won't be alone." Cameron's arms tightened around Sarah. "Grandma, don't grandma me. I'm old and I'm sick and I don't have time for pretty lies. But I do have time to see you two get engaged." Sarah choked on her hot chocolate. "Rose, I'm not saying you have to get married tomorrow. But an engagement would be nice. Something to celebrate before spring." Cameron looked down at Sarah, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "What do you think? Want to get engaged to me?" "I think you're both insane," Sarah said, laughing despite herself.
We've been really dating for exactly 3 weeks. But we've been pretend dating for almost a month, Cameron pointed out. That has to count for something.
Rose clapped her hands together.
Oh, this is perfect. A Christmas engagement. I'll call the photographer in the morning. We haven't said yes yet, Sarah protested. Haven't you? Rose raised an eyebrow. Look at yourselves. You're already planning your future together. You just haven't made it official.
Sarah looked up at Cameron, this man who'd walked into her coffee shop and changed everything.
Are we really doing this? Sarah Chen, Cameron said solemnly, will you marry me?
For real this time, not for money or pretense or any other reason except that I love you and I can't imagine my life without you.
Yes, Sarah said, the word coming out without hesitation. Yes, I'll marry you.
Rose whooped with joy, and Cameron kissed Sarah under the winter stars, and somewhere in the distance, Sarah could swear she heard the sound of the universe laughing at the beautiful absurdity of it all. 6 months later, on a perfect spring day with wildflowers blooming across the hills and Rose sitting in the front row despite her doctor's predictions, Sarah Chen became Sarah Ridge in a small ceremony on the front lawn of the ranch.
Mrs. Henderson cried through the entire service.
Thunder watched from his pasture, having learned to respect garden boundaries. And the coffee shop, now expanded and thriving with Cameron's investment and Sarah's vision, served as the reception venue for the most unlikely love story their small town had ever witnessed. As they danced to their first song as husband and wife, Sarah looked up at Cameron and marveled at how her life had changed. Any regrets? He asked, spinning her slowly under the string lights they'd hung between the trees.
Just one, Sarah said. Cameron's face fell. What? I never did get that $50,000.
Cameron threw back his head and laughed, the sound rich and warm and full of joy.
I'll write you a check tomorrow. Don't you dare. I got something much better. What's that? Everything I never knew I wanted.
Cameron kissed her then, in front of their family and friends, under the Montana sky, with Rose beaming at them from her wheelchair and the future stretching out before them like a promise they were both ready to keep. Sometimes the best gifts come disguised as the worst ideas. Sometimes rescue comes in the form of a proposition that seems too crazy to work. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the person you hire to pretend to love you turns out to be the person you were meant to love all along.